Hello, my name is Jacob Delgado, and I'm from AspenMesh. In today's lightning talk, we will be discussing using ECC workload certificates using pilot agent environmental variables. Before we begin, we should talk about various use cases and why this feature was initially developed. So there are certain environments where all certificates that are used within the system require ECC certificates. Prior to Istio 1.6, there was no support for this, and as of Istio 1.6 and above, there is limited support for this using environmental variables. This is done so that MTLS communication, as it is done in sidecar-to-sidecar communication, can use ECC certificates. It is worthy to note, though, that until about a month ago, in order to use this capability, you had to plug in a custom CA certificate that also used ECC cryptography using ECDSA P256 in order to utilize this feature. As of Istio 1.7.7 and higher, 1.8.2 and higher, and 1.9.0 and higher, that restriction is no longer in place and the bug was fixed. It is also noteworthy that only ECDSA P256 is supported at the current time. So let me also start out with a disclaimer. Environmental variables and their use are considered experimental within the Istio community. There's no guarantee that they will not be deprecated in a future release. Use at your own discretion. Now, while I will be talking about ECC cryptography or ECC workload certificates in this talk, I will also talk about the migration path that I am currently working on and will propose for future versions. So in order to do this, though, in order to enable this feature, users must set the ECC signature algorithm environmental variable on sidecar injection to ECDSA for use by pilot agent. This also has to be done for gateways, even though they do not have a sidecar, but they do have an Envoy proxy and a pilot agent executable alongside it as well. To use this feature and install this feature using istioctl, you will either create or modify your existing IOP YAML file, and you will add the following to it: mesh config, default config under that, proxy metadata, and then you will add the environmental variable and the value ECC signature algorithm, ECDSA. You will then use either istioctl install or istioctl manifest generate, and you will pass in via the -f argument the IOP file that you have modified or created. For Helm, things are a bit different. It is a standard operating procedure using Helm that you do not modify the existing chart, but you create a value overrides file. And in this value overrides file, you will again add the mesh config, default config, proxy metadata, and the key value pair of ECC signature algorithm, ECDSA, to it. And then when you install or upgrade, you will append the -- values flag and pass in the values overrides file that is specified on the screen. Unlike istioctl, though, this has to be done for each chart. So istiod, istio ingress, istio egress, as well as istiod remote, if you use that. This does not need to be done for the base chart, however. So once you have deployed Istio and have set this environmental variable, it is a good practice to make sure that you inspect your workload certificates and that you've enabled this functionality correctly. istioctl provides various subcommands that allow you to inspect the certificate that is being served over SDS with proxy-config, secret, and then you specify the pod and the pod name, output it to JSON, and then using some commonly available tools like JQ and Base64 and OpenSSL, you can actually inspect the certificate as it is being served over MTLS. And in this case, when I ran this, you can see that the certificate that is being served for the workload, the public key algorithm, the public key, the ASN1 OID, and the NIST curve all match using ECC P256. It is also noteworthy, though, that unless you plug in your own CA custom certificate that is using ECC, if you have Istio generate its own self-signed certificate, it will be using RSA. So there is currently no mechanism to have that self-signed CA certificate in using ECC. So given that this is an environmental variable, and I disclosed earlier that environmental variables are considered experimental, there is an initiative for Istio 1.10, which will be released roughly in 2.5 months or so from now, to have this feature be included as mesh config as an alpha feature. So this will also allow us to have a migration path where, for at least Istio 1.10 and probably 1.11, this environmental variable will be supported, and then after which we will announce probably the deprecation of this environmental variable and choose this. So hopefully this will give you enough time to adopt the preferred method, which is using the Istio API instead of environmental variables. So it's also noteworthy that there are other environmental variables that you can change and modify around certificates and a few other features. I've included a link to the Istio.io website where I list that information. Again, though, I want to give you kind of a word of caution. While there may be limited documentation in some of these environmental variables, support for it is very limited, and it is considered experimental. So please look for other ways to enable capability, whether it's through the operator API or Helm values, to see if there are ways that you can enable this functionality in a way that is supported by the community. And with that, I would like to give my thanks to the Istio community for their time. Feel free to reach me on Slack if you have any remaining questions. If not, thank you for your time.